Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the morning haze of Imperial China, where the air is so thick with incense smoke and the smell of boiled millet that you can practically taste someone else's breakfast before you've even had your own. You wake to the sound of palace drums, not the gentle kind you'd want as an alarm clock, but the sort that rattles your ribs and tells you the bureaucracy has already been awake for hours without you. And before you can even think about stretching under your blanket, you realize something important. The rules here start before breakfast, which means you're already behind. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And hey, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is right now for you. The moment you sit up on your thin, creaky wooden bed, you're reminded that even your posture is part of the performance. In this world, slouching isn't just sloppy, it's practically subversive. In the Forbidden City, where the Emperor's will flows like a river and you're just one of the reeds swaying along, there's a manual for everything: how to walk, how to bow, how to breathe when a superior passes. And you thought high school had cliques. Outside, the courtyards are already a flurry of motion. Servants shuffle across polished tiles with the precision of a well-oiled machine, carrying trays of tea that you will never drink because they're meant for someone with a title so long it could double as a scroll. You pull on the simple robes you've been given. Thin cotton if you're lucky, scratchy hemp if you're not. And here's your first reality check. In this world, your clothing is your resume. Wear the wrong color? You might be accused of impersonating a rank you don't have. Wear silk without permission? You're either incredibly important or about to be publicly humiliated. The palace gates loom ahead, painted in red so rich it almost glows in the morning light. Guards in lacquered armor stand still as statues, though you can tell from the way their eyes dart that they're clocking every movement you make. You've heard stories. Historians still argue whether some of these guards were more like spies in shiny helmets than actual defenders, but either way, you're not about to test them. Then comes the ceremonial breakfast bell, a sound that could mean sustenance for some or a new round of stomach-clenching anxiety for others. High officials gather in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, their robes layered in patterns that seem to tell entire family histories. You're lucky to be allowed to stand at the back, feet tucked neatly under you in the prescribed stance so you don't look like you're about to bolt. But there's a quiet tension here, like a boardroom where no one trusts each other, but everyone smiles anyway. The Emperor's presence is invisible yet heavy, like the smell of sandalwood clinging to every corner. You keep your head bowed just enough to be respectful, but not so low that you seem guilty of something, because here, guilt is often decided by posture alone. A servant slips past carrying a jade water pitcher, and you swear for a second you see the faintest smirk. That's because servants here, the eunuchs and ladies-in-waiting, are like human filing cabinets. They store secrets, and the right one could topple an entire household. Everyone knows it. Everyone pretends they don't. Your stomach growls, but the concept of breakfast, as you know it, doesn't really apply here unless you're in the Emperor's immediate circle. For most, it's a rushed bowl of congee eaten standing up in some drafty corridor. But even that's not simple. There's etiquette for how you hold the spoon where your eyes should be while chewing, and absolutely no slurping unless you want a career-ending rumor about your animal manners. By mid-morning, the ceremonial obligations are already mounting. You might be summoned to witness a report on grain taxes from some far-flung province you've never heard of, nodding politely while mentally calculating how long it'll be before your legs go numb from kneeling. The sheer pace of ritual is exhausting, and you start to see why survival here isn't about strength or wit, it's about endurance. And just when you think maybe you've found your rhythm, a court official in layered blue silk brushes past you, his perfume so overpowering it could probably be classified as a weapon. He doesn't acknowledge you, not because he's rude, but because acknowledging you in public could imply political alignment. In the Forbidden City, being noticed is as dangerous as being invisible. So congratulations, you've made it 3 hours into your first day in Imperial China, You're starving, your knees hurt, and you've already committed at least 2 infractions you don't understand. And that's before the real trouble starts, because next comes the deceptively calm tea ritual, which, as you'll see, has far more to do with politics than refreshment. You'd think tea in Imperial China would be the one safe moment in your day, something warm, fragrant, and blissfully uncomplicated. But no, here tea is less about drinking and more about performing, and the stage is set with porcelain cups so delicate you feel guilty even breathing near them. The tea service begins in a hall lined with screens painted in soft ink washes, mountains fading into mist, cranes stepping delicately in ponds, all whispering the Empire's favourite aesthetic: serene control. You take your seat, well, not a seat exactly, more a small, politely uncomfortable stool, and wait for the first pour. The servants move like clockwork, each gesture a brushstroke in a painting you're terrified of smudging. This is where you learn something fast. Tea is politics in liquid form. The quality of the leaves says something about your standing. The order in which cups are served says something else. And the way you hold your cup. That could be the difference between charming guest and disrespectful bumpkin. Historians still argue whether tea etiquette was truly about respect or just a covert ranking system to remind everyone of their place. Your host, some mid-tier official whose silk robe shimmers like a pond at dawn, leans forward with the sort of polite half-smile that could mean friendship or threat. His voice is low, the kind of low that forces you to lean in, which of course draws the attention of every other guest. He asks you how you find the capital, and you give the safest answer possible. It's busy. You leave out the part about the sensory overload, the constant scrutiny, and the fact that the street noise alone could fuel your anxiety for a week. Then comes the tea pouring itself. The servant tilts the pot with a flourish, letting the stream hit the exact center of your cup. If it dribbles, it's bad luck for you. If it's perfectly clean, well, congratulations, you've passed the first invisible test. You raise the cup with both hands, bow your head slightly, and take a sip. It's hot enough to melt your tongue, but you keep your face serene because this, too, is part of the ritual. While you sip, the talk turns to taxes, grain shipments, and the recent examination results. You quickly realize this isn't idle chatter, it's a verbal chess match. One official compliments another on his province's harvest, but the way he says "remarkable" carries the faintest edge, like he's hinting the numbers are inflated. Another remarks on the Emperor's latest decree about river maintenance, but his tone suggests he's questioning the competence of those assigned to it. You sit there, nodding when others nod, laughing lightly when others laugh, hoping no one asks for your opinion. But of course, someone does. A younger official, clearly enjoying himself, leans over and asks if you think the new irrigation system in the south will solve the recurring famine problem. You take a careful breath. Historians still argue whether that particular policy was a stroke of genius or an elaborate waste of resources, and you are in no mood to take sides in a centuries-old debate that could, in this moment, become a career-ender. So you smile, sip your tea again, and say, "The rivers have their own minds." This earns a few chuckles, either because they think you're wise or because they think you're too harmless to be worth arguing with. Either way, you'll take it. Then comes the refill, and with it, another subtle test. You've heard that in certain circles, tapping your fingers on the table to thank the server is expected. In others, it's considered common. You decide to split the difference and simply incline your head, hoping it reads as dignified restraint. The servant's face gives nothing away. It's about now that you notice the tea itself is more complex than anything you've tasted before. Layers of flavor, floral, smoky, earthy, slip over your tongue, each one a small reminder that this leaf has traveled farther and been treated with more care than you could ever expect for yourself here. And yet, the actual drinking feels secondary to the theatre of it all. The tea is an excuse for gathering, for quiet probing, for reaffirming hierarchies without ever raising a voice. Just as you start to relax, the conversation shifts to the imperial examinations, those infamous tests that can make or break entire families. A guest mentions a young scholar who reportedly wrote a perfect essay on governance, only to be failed for using an unapproved metaphor. Everyone nods solemnly, but you can see the glimmer of schadenfreude in their eyes. Here, success is as dangerous as failure. Both draw attention, and attention is a double-edged sword. The tea service ends with the faint clink of cups being collected. No one leaves right away. Instead, they linger, trading a few last observations, each word as carefully measured as the leaves in the pot. You rise only when your host does, and you bow just deeply enough to signal respect without implying servitude. And then you step back into the sunlit courtyard, blinking at the sudden brightness. The scent of tea still lingers in your mouth, but so does the taste of careful restraint. You've survived the tea ritual without spilling a drop or a secret. A small victory, but in this world, small victories are worth counting. Unfortunately, now comes the next challenge, getting dressed for the afternoon audience without accidentally wearing something that could land you in serious trouble. Silk, color, pattern, each choice is a minefield, and you're walking straight into it. You'd think getting dressed would be the easiest part of the day. You'd be wrong. In Imperial China, clothing isn't just clothing. It's a declaration, a resume, and, if you're unlucky, a signed confession to a crime you didn't know existed. The dressing chamber smells faintly of camphor wood and steamed fabric, an oddly soothing scent that does nothing to calm the knot in your stomach. A lacquered chest is open before you, and inside are neatly folded robes in layers of cotton, silk, and brocade, each one carrying unspoken rules you have yet to master. The attendant, a man with the kind of unreadable face that makes you think he's seen empires rise and fall, says nothing. He simply watches. You suspect that even the act of choosing a robe is being silently assessed. Color is the first trap. Yellow, the brilliant shade of ripe chrysanthemums, is reserved for the emperor himself. Wear it without permission and you might as well sign up for public humiliation, if you're lucky. Red is festive and politically neutral, but wear too much and you risk being mistaken for a bride or a high-ranking official's guest of honor. Black is dignified, but also associated with certain mourning rites. Blue, safe, unless it's the deep indigo shade favored by certain factions at court. You'd need a flowchart just to get through the wardrobe. Historians still argue whether these clothing codes were primarily about aesthetics or about keeping everyone too busy worrying over sleeves to start plotting rebellion. Either way, they work. After a tense moment, you settle on a muted grey silk with pale embroidery, decorative enough to suggest you understand refinement, but plain enough not to scream ambition. Next comes the cut and pattern. Dragon motifs? Off limits unless you have imperial blood. Phoenix patterns? Reserved for empresses and consorts. Even a simple cloud swirl could be read as an attempt to associate yourself with celestial power. You choose a robe with discreet bamboo stalks along the hem, hoping they'll say, "I admire virtue," rather than, "I secretly think I should be in charge." Then there's the matter of accessories. A belt buckle made from jade? Elegant, but the wrong shade of jade could hint at allegiance to a particular family. A fan is safe, provided you know how to hold it. And by safe of course, we mean slightly less likely to ruin your life. You're told to leave the hair ornaments alone. Apparently, a misplaced hairpin could change your perceived marital status, and you are not in the mood to start rumors before lunch. As you change, the attendant adjusts each fold of fabric with the precision of a cartographer drawing borders. Every layer must lie flat. Every cuff must be even. The robe is wrapped, tied and smoothed into place until you feel less like a person and more like a carefully wrapped gift no one asked for. Once you're dressed, the transformation is startling. The mirror shows a figure that could almost pass for a seasoned courtier, calm, composed, entirely intentional. But you know the truth. Under all that silk, your heart is pounding like a ceremonial drum. You step out into the corridor, the hem of your robe whispering over the polished tiles. Servants pause just long enough to glance at your outfit before continuing, and you can't tell if their lack of reaction is good or terrifying. In the Forbidden City, silence can mean approval or that they're saving their gossip for later. The walk to the audience chamber takes you through a maze of courtyards and corridors, each lined with carved wooden panels depicting mythical beasts and scrolling clouds. The sunlight catches on the glazed tiles of the roofs above, sending little flashes into your eyes. You focus on keeping your pace steady. Too fast looks nervous, too slow looks arrogant. Somewhere between a measured stroll and a purposeful glide is the sweet spot, and you're praying you found it. At the chamber entrance, a eunuch greets you with a smile so slight it could be mistaken for a trick of the light. He gestures for you to wait while the final arrangements are made inside. This is another test, though it's dressed up as courtesy. How you stand, how you hold your hands, even where your eyes rest during the wait, all of it will be noted by someone. Finally, the great doors swing open, revealing a room that hums with restrained energy. Officials are already in place, their robes a living tapestry of rank and privilege. You take your assigned position along the outer row, making sure your sleeves fall in an elegant drape. And then, the murmurs die down. The air shifts, heavy with anticipation. Somewhere beyond the carved screens at the far end of the hall, the Emperor's presence waits, a presence you won't see directly but will feel in every glance, every pause, every breath you take from now until the audience ends. You've made it this far without a wardrobe disaster, which in itself is an accomplishment. But now comes the fabric, and in Imperial China, words have toppled far more people than colours ever did. The moment you step out of the palace quarter and toward the capital's bustling streets, the shift is like stepping from a meticulously tuned orchestra into a drum circle that never ends. The noise isn't chaotic exactly, it's rhythmic, patterned, a hum of life that's been going on for centuries. But to someone fresh from the solemn, incense-soaked halls of the Forbidden City, it's an overload of colour, sound and smell. The markets of the capital are an ecosystem unto themselves. Stalls crowd together under sloping roofs, their canopies faded from the sun, each one spilling over with its own little universe. Lacquer bowls that shine like wet ink, bolts of raw silk in jewel tones, baskets of persimmons and pomegranates that look so perfect they might be painted. The smells fight for dominance. Roasting chestnuts, sizzling scallion pancakes, fresh ginger being peeled right there on the street. Your stomach votes for the pancakes immediately, but your brain reminds you that in this city, nothing is simple, not even street food. Because here, conversation is as much a transaction as the money you hand over. Say the wrong thing to the wrong vendor, and you might just be flagged as an outsider or worse, a troublemaker. Historians still argue whether the capital's famed street markets were the empire's great equalizer or just another stage for its rigid social hierarchies. Either way, the first thing you learn is to keep your ears open and your mouth mostly shut. A fishmonger calls out to you, his voice deep and smooth, as if he's reciting poetry instead of yelling about the freshness of his carp. You smile politely but keep walking. Too much eye contact, and you'll be stuck in an impromptu performance about river currents and auspicious cooking days. A cloth merchant beckons you toward a spread of indigo-dyed cottons, the deep blues practically humming with colour. You want to touch them, but you remember the silk code from earlier. Wearing the wrong fabric at the wrong time is bad enough. Being seen choosing it in the wrong company could spark whispers before sundown. And then there's the food stalls. Oh, the food stalls. Steam curls up from bamboo baskets holding pillowy white buns, each one pinched into a neat spiral. A hawker ladles out bowls of thick mung bean porridge while calling customers honoured guest, in a tone that could either be genuine or sarcastic. You can't tell, but the porridge smells good enough that you're willing to risk it. You hand over a copper coin, take the bowl, and follow the unspoken rule of stepping aside so someone else can order. The first sip nearly burns your tongue, but the sweetness balances with the earthy bean, and for just a moment you forget to be wary. Until you hear it, two merchants behind you, their voices low but urgent, talking about a shipment of goods that went missing on the Grand Canal. It's not your business, but you catch enough words, grain tax, inspection, southern prefect, to know This is the kind of conversation that could drag you into a political swamp if you're caught listening. You move on quickly, pretending to be fascinated by a stall selling tiny clay teapots shaped like animals. The narrow lanes twist and turn, and you notice how each section of the market has its own rhythm. The spice row is a sensory ambush, sacks of star anise, peppercorns and cinnamon bark piled high, the air so thick with scent you can taste it. The pottery row is quieter, with artisans bent over their wheels, shaping clay into bowls and vases while apprentices fan the kilns. Then there's the calligraphy lane, where brush-wielding masters paint poems on rice paper while passers-by gather to watch the characters bloom under each stroke. You almost relax enough to linger until a patrol of city watchmen strolls past. Their armor is plainer than the palace guards, but the way they scan the crowd is just as sharp. One pauses, looks directly at you, then moves on. You exhale slowly, reminding yourself that in Imperial China's capital, the line between citizen and suspect can be as thin as the paper on a lantern. By late afternoon, the market begins to thin. Shopkeepers tuck away unsold goods, and the street food vendors pack up their steaming baskets. The shadows grow long, and the chatter softens to a murmur. You've survived the markets without a public blunder, though you can't shake the sense that someone, somewhere, noted your every move. Your robe smells faintly of chestnut smoke now, and your sleeves carry the ghost of star anise. The city has marked you in its own way, just as you've marked it with your hesitant steps. But as the sun dips toward the horizon, you know the next trial will be nothing like the bustle of the streets, because now you're heading back toward the scholarly halls, where the imperial exams decide not just your fate, but the fate of entire families, and unlike the market, there's no way to buy your way through those gates. The road to the examination hall feels heavier than the cobblestones beneath your feet. Here in Imperial China, the imperial exams aren't just tests, they're the empire's gatekeepers, the grand sorting machine that decides who gets to shape policy and who gets to go home and explain to their family why they're still living off borrowed rice. By the time you reach the outer courtyard, the scale of the ordeal is already clear. The hall is a fortress of stone and tile, its walls lined with narrow cells where candidates will spend days, or in some cases weeks, writing essays by lamplight. The gates are crowded with hopeful scholars, their hair tied neatly, their robes plain but spotless, each one clutching brushes, inkstones and stacks of bamboo, slip notes. No one talks loudly here. Even the ones pretending to be relaxed have that distant, glassy stare of people replaying Confucian classics in their heads like a desperate mantra. You don't get to wander inside without clearance, of course, but your pass today is as an observer, which means you'll get a front row seat to the tension without the burden of actually writing until your hand cramps. That might sound easier, but here's the thing. You're also expected to understand the stakes because every move you make, where you stand, who you greet, says something about your sympathies, and sympathies here are political currency. Historians still argue whether the exams truly promoted meritocracy or simply reinforced the same elite networks by rewarding those who could afford decades of tutoring. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but to the man hunched over his desk right now, scratching out an essay on the proper balance of justice and compassion in governance, it doesn't matter. All he knows is that a misplaced metaphor could sink his future before it begins. A guard leads you along the central aisle between rows of exam cells. The smell is a mix of ink, lamp oil, and unwashed nerves. Some candidates have already started writing, their brushes gliding over paper with the fluidity of years of practice. Others sit frozen, staring at the blank sheet as if willing the right opening line to appear. A few mutter softly to themselves, rehearsing arguments about tax relief or border defense. You pause at one cell where a young man is sketching a diagram alongside his essay. Technically that's allowed, but diagrams are risky. They can be interpreted as either insightful or gimmicky, depending on the examiner's mood. He glances up, sees you watching, and quickly hides the drawing under a sheet of text. Smart. At the far end of the hall, an examiner sits at a raised desk, face as still as a carved idol. His job is not just to oversee, but to detect cheating, whether that's hidden notes, sewn into clothing, coded phrases in essays, or collusion between candidates. You've heard rumours that some have tried to smuggle in pre-written essays disguised as letters from home, but those stories usually end with public disgrace and a career that never starts. You're ushered into a side room where a group of officials are quietly discussing the essay prompts. The current batch includes topics like how to ensure harmony between provinces and the moral obligations of a ruler. You sip tea while they talk, aware that even your expression right now could be interpreted. Too approving, and they might assume you favour the current administration's policies. Too sceptical, and you could be tagged as oppositional. You aim for vaguely reflective, which is exhausting in its own way. Out in the courtyard, the day stretches on. Meals are delivered to candidates in plain wooden boxes. Rice, pickled vegetables, maybe a sliver of fish if they're lucky. You overhear one candidate thanking the guard, his voice trembling slightly. Whether from gratitude or fear, you can't tell. By dusk, the lanterns are lit and the hall becomes a sea of flickering light. You stand at the gate and watch as ink brushes scratch into the night, the steady sound, almost meditative, because you know each stroke carries the weight of not just ambition but entire lineages waiting back home. And you realise something: if you had to take this exam tomorrow, you wouldn't last 10 minutes. Not because you don't know the material you could cram, but because the pressure is so relentless, so threaded into every breath, that your own thoughts would collapse under it. Here, failure isn't just personal, it's public, and it follows you for life. As you turn to leave, a soft breeze carries the faint smell of burning oil and wet paper. Somewhere inside, someone is finally finding the perfect closing line. Somewhere else, another is still staring at a blank sheet. And somewhere in between, the fate of the next decade of imperial governance is being quietly written in brush strokes. But for you, the next step is far less academic. You've been invited to a lunch with the literati, where the politics are plated alongside the dumplings, and just like the exam hall, every bite will be a test. If you've ever imagined lunch with poets and scholars as a tranquil affair of gentle conversation and delicate tea, Imperial China is here to disillusion you. Lunch with the literati is a performance, a carefully choreographed dance where food is the stage, the chopsticks are props, and you, my friend, are one poorly timed bite away from becoming an anecdote whispered across calligraphy desks for the next decade. The venue is a private courtyard shaded by ancient ginkgo trees, their broad leaves casting dappled light over polished stone tables. The air smells faintly of plum blossoms and freshly steamed buns, a combination so pleasant you almost forget you're about to be socially dissected. The guests are already here, robes arranged just so, each colour and fold calculated to say, "I belong," without saying, "I'm trying too hard." You're seated between two men whose conversation could double as a fencing match. On your left is a historian with a beard so long you half expect him to use it as a bookmark. On your right, a poet whose smile is warm enough to disguise the fact that he's been slipping subtle jabs into every other sentence. The table is laid with lacquered dishes, each one holding something that looks like a still life painting. Jade green cucumbers carved into spirals, glossy roast duck with skin so crisp it catches the light, dumplings shaped like tiny silver ingots. Here's your first unspoken rule. In this company, chopstick etiquette is political. Hold them too low and you'll be read as clumsy or rural. Hold them too high and you'll be accused of pretension. Historians still argue whether this level of scrutiny was cultural refinement or just the literati's way of keeping outsiders perpetually off balance. You decide to aim for the middle, fingers steady, grip relaxed, praying you won't accidentally fling a dumpling into someone's lap. The conversation drifts from poetry to politics with the same subtlety as a river changing course. One scholar recites a couplet about spring rain, which the historian immediately interprets as a critique of current agricultural policy. Another compares the new tax reforms to pruning a peach tree, good for the fruit but dangerous if done carelessly. You nod along, offering the occasional indeed or How true, while concentrating on not dribbling soy sauce onto your robe. A server appears with a dish of braised pork belly, the glaze so rich it glistens like lacquer. The poet to your right gestures for you to take the first piece, a gesture that could be generous. Or a subtle test. Taking the first bite implies you're confident enough to lead. Refusing suggests humility, but also caution. You opt for the middle road again. You accept, but pass the platter along immediately, murmuring something about how flavors are best shared. Midway through the meal, a delicate porcelain cup of Huangju is set before you. The rice wine is warm, fragrant, and deceptively mild, until the second sip hits you like a polite slap. You notice the historian's eyes on you, as if waiting to see whether you'll drain the cup too quickly or nurse it so slowly you seem distrustful. You choose a steady pace, sipping between bites, hoping to project the confidence of someone who knows their limits. And then the poet leans closer. His voice drops just enough to force you into the intimate bubble of conversation. "Tell me," he says, "what do you think of the Emperor's plan to expand the civil service?" You know this is a trap. Answer too enthusiastically and you might align yourself with a faction you barely understand. Criticize it, and you risk offending someone at the table who has already written a glowing essay on the topic. You take a slow bite of duck, chew, and say, "Expansion is good provided the foundation is strong. It's vague, safe, and bland enough to pass for wisdom." The lunch stretches on, each course another opportunity for subtle maneuvering. A plate of lotus root arrives, sliced so thin the light shines through it, and you make sure to praise its crispness in a way that also complements the host's refinement. A bowl of clear soup with winter melon and dried scallops is placed in front of you, and you remember just in time to lift the bowl to your lips rather than lean down to sip. Small details that can mean the difference between being remembered fondly or as that awkward guest. By the time the final dish, a platter of candied kumquats, makes its rounds, you've somehow avoided scandal. The historian strokes his beard approvingly. The poet gives you a smile that might actually be genuine, and the host nods as if to say, "You did well enough to be invited back." But lunch with the literati isn't about food. It's about showing you can navigate a battlefield without swords, only chopsticks and conversation. And as you step out of the courtyard, belly full but mind sharper than when you entered, you realize you've survived another test. Unfortunately, the next one is less about elegance and more about survival. Because when the Emperor's shadow falls across the court, every word you've spoken today might suddenly matter. The corridors that lead toward the Hall of Supreme Harmony feel colder than the shaded courtyard you've just left. It's not the temperature, it's the air itself, heavy with a silence that presses against your ribs. This is where the Emperor's shadow falls, even when the man himself is nowhere in sight. You walk between high vermilion walls, the stone beneath your feet worn smooth by centuries of court processions. Every few steps you pass a pair of eunuchs stationed like carved ivory statues. They bow just enough to acknowledge your presence, but their eyes, sharp and quick, catalogue you as if you were a new volume being added to the Imperial Library. Historians still argue whether the eunuchs' true power came from their official duties or from the invisible threads of information they wove between the Emperor and the rest of the court. Either way, you know better than to underestimate them. The chamber doors loom ahead, massive panels inlaid with gold studs that glint even in the dim light. When they open, the sound is deliberate, slow enough to announce that this is not a place you enter casually. Inside, the vast hall swallows sound. The lacquered pillars rise like a forest of redwood trunks, and at the far end, shrouded behind a series of carved screens, is the throne itself. You won't see the Emperor's face today, not directly. His presence is a matter of ritual, voice, and the carefully choreographed movements of those who stand closest to him. Your position is toward the back, alongside lesser officials and observers. You kneel as required, the wooden floor hard enough to make your knees ache instantly. Ahead of you, a senior minister begins to read a report on grain shipments, his voice steady but pitched just high enough to carry to the throne. It's a litany of numbers, locations, and the occasional cautious suggestion, because in this hall, suggestions are only safe if they align with what the Emperor already wants. You glance sideways, catching the faintest twitch of an eyebrow from the official beside you as a eunuch steps forward to whisper something to the minister mid-sentence. The minister pauses, adjusts his phrasing, and continues. Whatever correction was given, it was enough to change the course of the report. You file that detail away, proof that in the Emperor's shadow, even your words belong to someone else. Then comes a petition from a governor in the far south requesting funds to repair dikes after a flood. The Emperor's reply is relayed through a chamberlain. Funds will be sent, but only if the governor can guarantee that repairs will be completed before the monsoon season. The wording is careful, the tone neutral, but everyone here hears the underlying message: fail, and you'll be held personally responsible. Your heart rate spikes when the chamberlain announces that observers may now offer supplementary notes. That's you. You're not expected to speak aloud, but to submit a written remark that could, in theory, influence policy. The problem? Writing nothing could be interpreted as disengagement, while writing too much could suggest overconfidence. You settle on a single sentence about the importance of early preparation in flood-prone areas, neutral, sensible, and unlikely to offend anyone unless they decide it does. All the while, the eunuchs circulate like silent wind, collecting documents, delivering messages, and occasionally locking eyes with someone just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. You notice one of them watching you a second too long before gliding away. Whether that means curiosity, suspicion, or nothing at all, you have no way of knowing, and that's the point. The audience ends not with applause or dismissal, but with a slow unraveling of posture. Officials rise in unison, retreating without turning their backs fully on the throne. You follow suit, your knees grateful for the movement, though your mind is still caught in the web of half-heard phrases and subtle power shifts. Outside, the sunlight feels almost foreign after the muted glow of the hall. The air smells faintly of sandalwood, carried out on the sleeves of those who served closest to the Emperor. You realize you've spent the last hour barely breathing deeply, as if any excess inhale might draw attention. And as you leave the palace grounds, you can't help but think, the Emperor's shadow is not about proximity, it's about reach. You've been on the edge of it all day, and it's still inside your bones. Next, you're heading far from the marble courtyards and silk robes, out to the countryside, where the Empire's grip is no less firm, but its face is different. There, life under the dragon throne means grain taxes, seasonal festivals, and the daily balancing act between survival and imperial duty. The corridors that lead toward the Hall of Supreme Harmony feel colder than the shaded courtyard you've just left. It's not the temperature, it's the air itself, heavy with a silence that presses against your ribs. This is where the Emperor's shadow falls, even when the man himself is nowhere in sight. You walk between high vermilion walls, the stone beneath your feet worn smooth by centuries of court processions. Every few steps you pass a pair of eunuchs stationed like carved ivory statues. They bow just enough to acknowledge your presence, but their eyes, sharp and quick, catalogue you as if you were a new volume being added to the Imperial Library. Historians still argue whether the eunuchs' true power came from their official duties or from the invisible threads of information they wove between the Emperor and the rest of the court. Either way, you know better than to underestimate them. The chamber doors loom ahead, massive panels inlaid with gold studs that glint even in the dim light. When they open, the sound is deliberate, slow enough to announce that this is not a place you enter casually. Inside, the vast hall swallows sound. The lacquered pillars rise like a forest of redwood trunks, and at the far end, shrouded behind a series of carved screens, is the throne itself. You won't see the Emperor's face today, not directly. His presence is a matter of ritual, voice, and the carefully choreographed movements of those who stand closest to him. Your position is toward the back, alongside lesser officials and observers. You kneel as required, the wooden floor hard enough to make your knees ache instantly. Ahead of you, a senior minister begins to read a report on grain shipments, his voice steady, but pitched just high enough to carry to the throne. It's a litany of numbers, locations, and the occasional cautious suggestion, because in this hall, suggestions are only safe if they align with what the Emperor already wants. You glance sideways, catching the faintest twitch of an eyebrow from the official beside you as a eunuch steps forward to whisper something to the minister mid-sentence. The minister pauses, adjusts his phrasing, and continues. Whatever correction was given, it was enough to change the course of the report. You file that detail away, proof that in the Emperor's shadow, even your words belong to someone else. Then comes a petition from a governor in the far south requesting funds to repair dikes after a flood. The Emperor's reply is relayed through a chamberlain. Funds will be sent, but only if the governor can guarantee that repairs will be completed before the monsoon season. The wording is careful, the tone neutral, but everyone here hears the underlying message: fail, and you'll be held personally responsible. Your heart rate spikes when the chamberlain announces that observers may now offer supplementary notes. That's you. You're not expected to speak aloud, but to submit a written remark that could, in theory, influence policy. The problem? Writing nothing could be interpreted as disengagement, while writing too much could suggest overconfidence. You settle on a single sentence about the importance of early preparation in flood-prone areas, neutral, sensible, and unlikely to offend anyone unless they decide it does. All the while, the eunuchs circulate like silent wind, collecting documents, delivering messages, and occasionally locking eyes with someone just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. You notice one of them watching you a second too long before gliding away. Whether that means curiosity, suspicion, or nothing at all, you have no way of knowing, and that's the point. The audience ends not with applause or dismissal, but with a slow unraveling of posture. Officials rise in unison, retreating without turning their backs fully on the throne. You follow suit, your knees grateful for the movement, though your mind is still caught in the web of half-heard phrases and subtle power shifts. Outside, the sunlight feels almost foreign after the muted glow of the hall. The air smells faintly of sandalwood, carried out on the sleeves of those who served closest to the Emperor. You realize you've spent the last hour barely breathing deeply, as if any excess inhale might draw attention. And as you leave the palace grounds, you can't help but think, the Emperor's shadow is not about proximity, it's about reach. You've been on the edge of it all day, and it's still inside your bones. Next, you're heading far from the marble courtyards and silk robes, out to the countryside, where the Empire's grip is no less firm, but its face is different. There, life under the dragon throne means grain taxes, seasonal festivals, and the daily balancing act between survival and imperial duty. Section 8. The road out of the capital winds through miles of farmland, the air growing fresher with every lie you travel. Though fresh here comes with a side note, it's the scent of tilled earth, manure, and wood smoke, all braided together into something that says, this is where the Empire eats. The countryside of Imperial China isn't quiet in the way you might imagine. No pastoral stillness here. It's alive with the rhythm of hands and tools, animals and carts, the constant low hum of 1,000 tasks that never stop. By the time you reach the first village, the sun is just high enough to gild the thatched roofs in warm light. Chickens dart between doorways, children chase each other through dusty lanes, and somewhere a bamboo flute carries a melody so simple you can't tell if it's a song or just someone playing while they work. The locals glance at you with curiosity. Your robe is clean, your posture still a little too upright for someone who belongs here, but their looks aren't unkind. In a place like this, strangers are judged less by titles and more by whether they get in the way. Your guide, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin, points out the granary at the village's edge. It's a squat, raised structure, its wooden slats darkened by years of weather, guarded not by soldiers, but by the collective watch of the villagers themselves. Grain here isn't just food, it's tax. Each family is expected to deliver a portion of their harvest to the state, a system as old as the empire itself. Historians still argue whether this was the fairest way to support the realm, or simply a way to keep rural communities tied to the center. You're invited to watch as a tax collector arrives, ledger tucked under his arm like a weapon made of paper. He's polite enough, nodding to each farmer as they present their sacks of millet or rice, but the balance of power is clear. Too little grain, and the record will note a shortfall that might invite an inspection, or worse, a fine. Too much, and you risk the tax being adjusted upward next season. It's a delicate dance, and everyone here knows the steps. Once the collection is done, the mood shifts. The market square, which had been quiet, bursts into life. Stalls appear almost magically, a woman selling steamed buns stuffed with pork and pickled greens, an old man with baskets of tea leaves from a nearby hillside, a potter displaying bowls so thin they glow when the light hits them. You buy a bun and nearly burn your mouth, but the soft dough and savoury filling make you forgive the heat instantly. Your guide takes you to the temple at the village centre, a small wood-beamed hall with curling incense smoke rising from its altar. Here, the local deity isn't just a spiritual figure, but also a civic one. Petitions for good harvests are written in neat brushstrokes and hung like leaves on the wall. You add your own offering, a coin, a bow, and a whispered wish that you'll survive the rest of your day without offending anyone important. By afternoon, preparations for the seasonal festival are underway. Women in bright cotton jackets hang strings of paper lanterns between the houses, while boys haul drums into the square. A group of elders sits under a tree folding strips of bamboo into intricate shapes. You ask what they're making, and your guide explains it's for the dragon dance. Though this dragon, he says with a grin, will be small enough not to frighten the children, but big enough to impress the tax collector if he sticks around. The festival begins as the sun dips low, casting the fields in a golden haze. Drums beat in a steady, pulsing rhythm, and the dragon, its cloth body painted in swirls of red and gold, winds through the square, bobbing and weaving in time with the music. Children run alongside it, laughing while the elders clap and call out blessings for the year ahead. It's easy to forget just for a moment that this joy exists under the constant weight of imperial oversight. And yet, even here, the empire is never far. A message arrives from the nearest administrative office, read aloud in the square. A reminder of the dates for next season's planting quotas, along with a note of thanks for the village's loyalty. The tone is warm, but the subtext is clear. You are seen, you are counted, and you are expected to remain so. As night falls, the lanterns glow like captured fireflies, and the air smells of roasted chestnuts and sweet rice cakes. You realize the countryside isn't a place of escape from the empire's grip. It's simply where the grip is wrapped in the familiar patterns of daily life. Here, survival isn't about court intrigue or silk codes. It's about knowing the river's moods, the weather's whims, and how to give the state exactly enough without giving it everything. Tomorrow you'll see what happens when nature itself refuses to cooperate, when the great rivers that feed this land decide to rise, and the balance between empire and earth tilts dangerously. The first sign that something's wrong isn't the sound, it's the smell. You're walking along the riverbank just after dawn when the air shifts from the usual blend of silt and morning mist to something sharper, heavier, almost metallic. Then you hear it, a low, continuous roar, not unlike distant thunder, except it doesn't fade. The river is swollen, its normally calm brown surface churning with a restless energy that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. This is no ordinary river. It's one of the empire's great lifelines, an artery that carries grain, goods, and people from one end of the realm to the other. When it floods, it doesn't just drown fields, it ripples through the entire political map. Villagers here have a grim saying, when the river is angry, the emperor listens. The truth is, he listens because he has to. Grain shortages make for hungry provinces, and hungry provinces make for unstable ones. By mid-morning, word has spread. Farmers abandon their ploughs to haul sacks of millet and rice onto higher ground. Children carry chickens in wicker baskets, while elders bundle scrolls of family records into cloth wraps. At the village temple, the local deity's altar is covered in fresh offerings. Fruit, incense, even a small silver hairpin. Anything to appease the waters. Historians still argue whether such offerings were acts of true faith or just desperate gestures to make the unbearable feel manageable. You follow the crowd to the embankment where the village headman is arguing with an imperial engineer sent from the prefecture. The engineer's robe is spotless, despite the mud, his voice clipped as he explains the need to reinforce the dike immediately. The headman points out the obvious. There aren't enough hands or materials to finish before nightfall. Behind them, the river swells and slaps against the dike's base like a restless beast testing its cage. And then there's the politics. Flood relief here isn't just about saving lives, it's about saving face. The empire wants to be seen as both benevolent and capable, but resources are finite, and every sack of grain sent here is one not sent somewhere else. You've heard of governors deliberately underreporting flood damage to avoid looking weak, and others exaggerating it to draw more aid than they strictly need. Both strategies are dangerous. By noon, a chain of villagers passes baskets of clay and stones to patch weak spots in the dike. You join in because standing idle feels wrong, but the work is exhausting. The sun bakes your back, the mud tries to claim your shoes, and every so often you catch a glimpse of driftwood, or is that someone's roof beam, being swept along by the current. A shout goes up from downstream. Part of the dike is beginning to crumble. The engineer rushes to direct reinforcements, while the headman sends runners to warn the households closest to the bank. The air is thick with tension and the smell of churned earth. You can feel the ground shudder under each surge of water. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the worst of the pressure seems to ease. The rain upstream must have slowed, because the roar fades to a restless murmur. The villagers keep working, though. No one here trusts the river to behave just because it's quieter. By nightfall, the dike is holding, patched and reinforced in a dozen places, each one a testament to blistered hands and aching backs. As the lanterns are lit along the main street, a messenger from the prefecture arrives. His orders are read aloud. The governor will send a small shipment of grain and tools for repairs to arrive within the week. The tone is congratulatory, praising the village's loyal spirit, but you can't help noticing it promises far less than what was requested. Later, as you sit by a small fire, warming your hands, you think about how the empire handles disaster. Relief is as much theatre as it is aid. Public gestures meant to reassure the masses, while the real calculations happen far from the muddy banks. In a way, it mirrors life at court, appearances maintained at all costs, even if the structure beneath is straining. Tomorrow you'll step away from rivers and dikes into the quieter but equally strange world of medicine and remedies, where curing an illness might involve as much superstition as science, and where accidentally making someone immortal isn't always meant as a joke. If you've been clinging to the hope that medicine in Imperial China will finally be straightforward, like say, you're sick, here's a pill, now rest, I'm afraid you're about to step into an entirely different kind of labyrinth. Here, medicine is an art, a philosophy, a catalogue of tastes, temperatures and energies, and occasionally a gamble. You're led into the home of a local physician, a modest wooden structure whose main room smells of dried roots, crushed leaves, and something faintly smoky that you can't place. Shelves line the walls, stacked with ceramic jars, each marked in neat brushstrokes: ginseng, angelica, astragalus, cinnamon twig. The physician, an elderly man with eyebrows so long they could almost be braided, greets you with the warmth of someone who has seen far worse cases than whatever you're carrying. The first thing he does is not ask you what's wrong. Instead, he takes your wrist between his fingers and closes his eyes. Pulse diagnosis, they call it, reading your health through the rhythm of your blood. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely effective or more of a ritualized conversation starter, but in this world, the pulse tells stories you didn't even know your body was writing. Too much heat in the liver, he murmurs, as if you've been hiding a small fire under your ribs. Treatment could mean anything from herbal decoctions to acupuncture to moxibustion, that last one involving burning small cones of dried mugwort on specific points of your skin. You watch as he prepares the moxa, the earthy smell filling the room. It's said to draw out cold and damp, restore balance, and occasionally, if done by someone with a flair for drama, impress the neighbours. He shows you the acupuncture needles next, slender, almost hair-thin, stored in a lacquered box. You're reassured that they don't hurt much, though the sight of them still makes you instinctively tighten your shoulders. The physician explains meridians, energy flows, and how a needle in your ankle might help a headache. You nod, partly because it's fascinating, partly because you don't want to seem like the squeamish outsider. Some treatments are surprisingly practical. You meet a mother with a sick child, and the physician prescribes ground apricot kernels mixed into a warm drink to soothe the boy's cough. Others, well, they tread into territory that blurs the line between medicine and myth. One elderly farmer swears by swallowing tiny pellets of powdered jade for vitality. Another woman claims her neighbor hasn't aged in 20 years thanks to a tonic made from deer antler velvet. Whether that's longevity or just good bone structure is anyone's guess. And then there's the alchemists. You hear of a reclusive scholar in the nearby hills who's been experimenting with elixirs, blends of herbs, minerals, and sometimes mercury, in pursuit of immortality. The irony is not lost on you when someone mentions his predecessor died in the middle of testing a life-extending formula. Still, the belief persists. In an empire this vast, with so many living and dying under its gaze, the idea of stretching your years, even at great risk, is a temptation that never quite fades. The physician, for his part, is practical. He talks about prevention as much as cure. Balanced diet, seasonal adjustments, the importance of not overworking during harvest. You can't help but think that his version of medicine is as much about managing the human spirit as the body itself. Before you leave, he offers you a small paper packet of dried chrysanthemum flowers. For the eyes, he says, brew with hot water when the day feels too heavy. You thank him, tucking it carefully into your sleeve. As you step back into the street, the smells of the apothecary still clinging to your robe, you realize medicine here is less about quick fixes and more about a continuous conversation with the body. It's a system built on observation, patience, and an acceptance that health is never permanent, only negotiated. Tomorrow your path will take you beyond the villages and sick rooms into the bustling world of trade along the silk routes. Their survival depends not on balancing humours or calming rivers, but on navigating the risks and rewards of a marketplace that stretches across continents. The road to the silk routes feels different from the paths you've walked before. Here, every bend and hill seems to hum with the promise of faraway things. Cinnamon from Ceylon, glass from the Roman West, lapis lazuli, the color of midnight from deep in Central Asia. This isn't just a road, it's the empire's open vein, carrying wealth, gossip, and the occasional disaster straight into its heart. You reach a bustling caravanserai just as the sun tips toward late morning. The air is thick with the scents of camel sweat, fried dumplings, and the resinous perfume of incense wafting from a stall near the gate. Merchants from every corner of the known world shout over one another, each voice a fragment of some larger, multilingual argument about quality and price. A man in a turban holds up a bolt of patterned cotton, its colors so vivid you can almost feel the monsoon rains that fed the indigo plants. Nearby, a woman from the southern ports offers small jars of cardamom, their aroma sharp enough to cut through the smell of leather and dust. Here, trade isn't just about goods, it's about connections. A merchant doesn't just sell you silk, he sells you a story of where it came from, who wove it, what omens accompanied its journey. Historians still argue whether the silk routes were more important as economic lifelines or as cultural ones, but standing here, surrounded by accents and fabrics and faces from across continents, you start to think the real value is in the mingling itself. You watch a deal being made over a chest of jade. The buyer is cautious, inspecting each stone under the bright midday light, while the seller swears on his ancestors that the jade comes from the purest riverbeds in Khotan. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. In this market, exaggeration is as essential as the merchandise. The imperial presence is here too, though less obvious than in the capital. Tax collectors in plain robes wander the stalls, tallying purchases and quietly noting who owes what. Guards linger near the gate, their hands resting lightly on their halberds, not because they expect trouble, but because trouble is always possible when so much value is concentrated in one place. You overhear one merchant grumble about the latest levies, muttering that he might take his business through the northern road to avoid them. Another warns him that the northern route is crawling with bandits this season. Choices here are never simple. And then there are the side hustles. You see a scribe offering to translate contracts into 3 languages. For a fee, of course, a jeweler quietly offers to escort a particularly valuable piece to its buyer's home, which probably means he's doubling as a guard. Even the tea sellers have their own strategies, brewing extra strong blends for weary camel drivers and lighter, fragrant teas for the wealthy traders who want something refined. One stall catches your eye, a display of maps painted on silk, showing not just roads but tiny illustrations of the towns, rivers and mountains along the way. The cartographer, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, points out a shortcut that could save days if you're willing to risk the narrow mountain passes. You're not traveling beyond the borders today, but you buy the map anyway. Something about holding a whole network of roads in your hands feels like owning a piece of possibility. By late afternoon, the caravanserai begins to transform. The shouts of bargaining fade into the softer sounds of preparation. Camels being loaded, wheels creaking as carts are inspected, merchants sharing a last pot of tea before setting out. The shadows grow long, painting the courtyard in gold and indigo. As you leave, you notice a small side alley where the less fortunate gather, a tinker repairing broken metal pots, a boy selling scraps of leftover fabric, a fortune teller casting sticks onto the ground and murmuring predictions. The glamour of the silk routes has its underbelly, and not everyone here walks away richer. The road from the caravanserai stretches ahead, vanishing into the haze of the horizon. Tomorrow, you'll follow it to the empire's very edges, where the walls of stone and watchtowers of the frontier stand between traders, farmers, and the nomadic raiders who test the empire's defenses year after year. Out there, the wealth of the silk routes means little, unless you can keep it safe. The road westward grows harsher with each li, the lush fields giving way to scrubland, then to bare, wind-scoured hills. Out here, the empire feels thinner, stretched across vast distances like an embroidered robe whose threads have begun to fray. This is the frontier, where the dragon throne's reach is measured not by silk banners and tax ledgers, but by the sound of war drums echoing against the Great Wall. You see the wall long before you reach it, a jagged grey ribbon running across the ridges, its watchtowers rising like clenched fists against the sky. Up close, it's less pristine than the court-approved paintings suggest. The bricks are worn, the mortar pitted, and in places the wind whistles through gaps like a flute. Still, it's impressive, and it does its job most of the time. The garrison here is small, a mix of seasoned soldiers with weathered faces and young recruits still adjusting to the smell of their own armor. They greet you politely, but keep their eyes on the horizon. Beyond these hills lie the territories of steppe riders, Mongols, Tatars, and others whose names the court speaks in tones half fearful, half respectful. Historians still argue whether the wall was more about keeping them out or reminding everyone inside where China ended. Your guide takes you up a steep stair to one of the watchtowers. Inside, it's cool and dim, the air heavy with the scent of stored grain, oiled weapons and faintly damp stone. A soldier gestures toward a rack of signal drums and fire baskets. "If they come," he says, "you'll hear us before you see them." You don't doubt it. The wall may be ancient, but its warning system is quick. A puff of smoke by day. A blaze of fire by night, passing the message from tower to tower faster than any rider could carry it. You spend the afternoon walking a stretch of the wall, the land unfurling in all directions. To the south, small villages cling to the edges of terraced fields. To the north, the grasslands ripple in the wind, empty until suddenly they're not. One soldier tells you about last autumn's raid, how a group of riders appeared seemingly out of nowhere, loosing arrows from horseback before melting back into the hills. No one died, but a dozen sheep and 3 oxen vanished. They don't need to conquer, he says with a shrug. They just need to remind us they can come whenever they want. As evening falls, you join the soldiers for their meal, a thick millet porridge with slices of preserved meat. It's hearty, but the flavour is secondary to its warmth. Conversation is light, full of teasing and small wagers over who will draw the next night watch. Still, beneath the jokes, you sense the constant readiness. Out here, danger doesn't announce itself until it's already too close. Night comes quickly, the wind picking up as the stars pierce the black sky. From the tower, you can see the watchfires stretching into the distance, each one a tiny sun marking the line between empire and everything else. You imagine the message chain flaring to life, first one, then another, then a dozen, and the thought alone tightens your chest. Down in the barracks, the soldiers sleep in shifts, boots lined neatly by the wall, weapons within arm's reach. You're given a small cot in a corner, but sleep doesn't come easily. Every sound, wind against the bricks, a distant horse's whinny, the creak of the watchtower stairs, feels loaded with possibility. When dawn comes, pale and sharp-edged, the horizon is clear. No smoke, no riders, just the endless sway of the steppe grass. The soldiers go about their morning drills as if the night's tension never happened. Out here, that's the way of things. Readiness without certainty, vigilance without end. Tomorrow, you'll leave the frontier's stark vigilance for something altogether different. A night among the red, lantern alleys of the capital where shadow plays and whispered gossip can be just as dangerous as any raid from the north. The capital looks different at night, especially once you slip away from the grand avenues and duck into the narrower lanes where the red lanterns sway. These are the entertainment quarters, the parts of the city the official maps politely gloss over but everyone knows exist. The cobblestones here are slick with lantern light, and the air smells of fried dumplings, perfumed hair oil, and that faint, smoky tang from braziers heating wine. You pass tea houses with open lattice windows, each spilling music and laughter into the street. From one, the pluck of a pipa drifts out, mingling with the slow, reedy notes of a bamboo flute. In another, you glimpse a storyteller standing on a small stage, arms sweeping wide as he describes a battle fought generations ago, his audience leaning forward, hanging on every word. Historians still argue whether such performances were a genuine record of history or an art form built on embellishment. Judging by the dramatic way he describes a general slaying 10 men with one swing, you're leaning toward the latter. The alley bends and you find the Shadow Playhouse. Inside, a white cloth screen glows from lamplight, and beyond it, deft hands guide thin leather puppets. Warriors, demons, court ladies, each joint moving with uncanny precision. The audience murmurs and chuckles at the right moments, sipping tea from tiny cups. You're mesmerized by the way the puppets seem alive, their battles and romances as vivid as anything in the palace halls. Between performances, the alley fills again. Merchants sell candied hawthorn skewers, their ruby glaze catching the light. A vendor stirs a pot of sweet ginger soup, the steam curling into the cool air. You're about to buy some when you hear it, a snippet of conversation in a low, conspiratorial tone. 2 men are standing just inside the doorway of a gambling house, speaking in the sort of clipped phrases that make your ears perk up. Petition rejected. Southern prefect. Send word before the festival. It's probably nothing, but in this city, gossip can travel faster than an imperial decree, and sometimes it lands harder. You move on before they notice you listening. Not all the lantern-lit doors are tea houses or theatres. Some open into courtyards where courtesans entertain guests, their robes shimmering in the glow, hair adorned with jade pins and gold filigree. Their laughter is warm, but you can hear the calculation in it, the way they guide conversations towards safer topics while still making each guest feel as if they've been given a rare confidence. Here, charm is a shield, and every smile is part of the transaction. You wander deeper, drawn by the rhythm of a drum somewhere ahead. It leads you to a small open square where performers juggle knives and spin plates atop bamboo poles. A crowd has gathered, coins clinking into a woven basket as a young acrobat balances on one hand, her feet kicking gracefully in the air. For a moment, everyone's eyes are on her, and the worries of taxes, decrees, and exams feel far away. As the night wears on, the alleys grow quieter, lanterns burn lower, their red paper glowing a deeper, almost wine-dark hue. The scent of warm wine and sesame oil lingers as shop shutters close. A few stragglers wander by, their footsteps slow, voices softened by drink. Somewhere, a storyteller's voice drifts into a final cadence, the last line hanging in the air before the clatter of cups signals the end. You make your way back toward the main road, the glow of the entertainment quarter fading behind you. The red lanterns might seem a world apart from the austere palace halls or the muddy riverbanks, but they share something with both. This is a place where appearances matter, where what's said and unsaid can change lives. Here, reputations are made in a night and undone in the space of a single whispered rumor. Tomorrow you'll face a less playful side of the empire, the punishments designed not just to correct behavior, but to remind everyone exactly who holds the power and why you'd prefer not to test it. If the Red Lantern alleys were a dance of charm and subtle suggestion, the empire's punishments are their stark opposite, deliberate, visible, and designed to leave no room for misunderstanding. You first encounter them not in some grim dungeon, but right in the open. A small square near the magistrate's office where justice is dispensed with an audience. The crowd gathers early, murmuring in low tones, their eyes flicking between the raised wooden platform and the officials arranging benches. The magistrate himself appears in plain black robes, his face unreadable, as though carved from the same ink-dark wood as his desk. Beside him, clerks stand with bamboo slips and brushes, ready to record every detail. A man is brought forward, accused of failing to pay grain taxes for 3 consecutive seasons. The punishment isn't execution or imprisonment, it's 20 strokes of the bamboo rod. The blows are delivered in a measured rhythm, not frenzied, not merciful, just steady. Historians still argue whether this sort of public discipline was more about deterrence or about reinforcing the spectacle of state authority. Watching the crowd, you suspect it's both. The next case is different. A merchant caught selling salt without the required state license. Salt here isn't just seasoning, it's a government monopoly, one of the empire's steadiest sources of revenue. His punishment is exile to a border province, a sentence that sounds less dramatic than it is. In reality, exile means leaving behind family, home, and all the small webs of connection that make survival easier. It's an elegant kind of cruelty, no blood, but a slow unraveling of a life. Some punishments are strangely ceremonial. A young scribe is accused of falsifying examination records, and rather than physical pain, he's ordered to stand in the square wearing a placard listing his crime. Passers-by read it, some shaking their heads in mock pity, others laughing under their breath. You can see the humiliation working on him faster than any cane. And then there are the soft punishments, being reassigned to an undesirable post, having your stipend reduced, losing the right to wear certain colours. They might not bruise the body, but they cut deep into pride and social standing. One official here you overhear was demoted to a post in a mosquito-ridden river delta for making an unflattering remark about the governor's poetry. No one says whether the remark was accurate. The magistrate's role in all this is both judge and performer. He listens, nods, occasionally questions, but his voice never rises. When he delivers a sentence, it's in the same tone you might use to order tea, a reminder that in this system, justice isn't about heat or passion, but about maintaining the careful balance of order. You're struck by how the punishments serve multiple audiences. For the condemned, there are immediate consequences. For the crowd, they're a warning. And for the officials, they're a reaffirmation of the invisible hierarchy that keeps the entire imperial machine turning. When the day's cases are finished, the platform is cleared, the clerks roll up their bamboo slips, and life resumes as if nothing happened. Merchants reopen their stalls, children chase each other across the square, and the smell of fried dumplings wafts in from a nearby alley. But you walk away with the sense that punishments here are never truly over. The sting of the rod fades, but the label, tax defaulter, illicit trader, dishonest scribe, sticks for life. And in a society where your reputation can open or close every door, that's as good as a sentence that never ends. Tomorrow will be your last full day in Imperial China, and it will take you back to the wide view, the centuries-long sweep of the Dragon Throne's rule, the cycles of chaos and order, and the small ways people survive in its shadow long after your footsteps fade. From the safety of the capital's western hill, you can see the Dragon Throne's domain stretch out like a living tapestry. Villages tucked among rivers, cities bound together by roads and canals, fields that ripple like silk under the wind. It's a view designed to make you believe the empire will last forever. And yet, the longer you've walked its streets, eaten at its tables, and stood in its shadow, the more you know permanence here is a kind of performance. The Dragon Throne itself isn't a chair, it's an idea. It outlives emperors, outlasts dynasties, surviving every famine, flood, coup and war by reinventing the image of itself. Historians still argue whether this resilience comes from the brilliance of its bureaucratic machinery or from the people who, generation after generation, find ways to adapt to its demands without losing themselves entirely. You think back to the places you've been. The palace courtyards where silence can be as dangerous as speech. The markets where a wrong glance could cost you more than money. The exam halls, temples, riverbanks and garrison towers. In each, survival depended on knowing the unspoken rules, even when those rules contradicted each other. One day you bowed deeper, the next you kept your eyes level, each choice a tiny wager in a game you could never fully see. The countryside stays with you most, the way life there blends loyalty to the state with loyalty to the land. Farmers paying grain taxes while still finding time for lantern festivals. Villagers repairing dikes without waiting for orders, because if they don't, no decree will keep the river out. In these places, the empire feels less like an all-powerful master and more like a distant relative, one you're obliged to respect, but who isn't there to help you milk the cows. You remember the moments of humor too, the tea ritual where everyone pretended not to test each other, the literati lunch where duck skin and metaphors shared equal weight, the sly gossip in the red lantern alleys. Even here, in a system built on rigid order, people find ways to laugh, to tease, to keep their humanity intact. And yet, the shadow is always there. The eunuch who watched you a second too long. The magistrate whose calm voice could dismantle a life. The watchfires on the Great Wall, marking the edge not just of land, but of certainty. This balance of splendor and fear is the Dragon Throne's real architecture. It's built less from stone and more from the quiet agreement that everyone, from emperor to farmer, will play their part. Standing on this hill, you can almost hear the pulse of it all, the scratch of a brush in an exam cell, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer in a market alley, the thud of boots on the wall's stone steps. It's not harmony in the musical sense, it's harmony in the way a storm cloud hangs heavy before releasing rain. If you stayed here longer, you might learn the deeper rhythms, when to speak, when to vanish into the background, when to bend so you won't break. But you also know that as an outsider, you've been moving under a certain shield of novelty. That shield would wear thin. One day, someone would decide your robe was too fine for your station, or your words too clever for your own good. And that would be the moment you'd wish you'd left earlier. From this vantage point, the empire glitters in the late light, the rivers catching gold as they wind toward the sea. You know that somewhere out there the court is drafting another decree, a farmer is sowing another row of millet, a merchant is weighing another bolt of silk. Life under the Dragon Throne keeps moving as it has for centuries, as it will long after your footsteps fade. And maybe that's the truest measure of its power, not the walls or the armies, but the way it makes itself part of the daily pattern until you can't imagine life without it. The hill grows quiet as the sun lowers, the capital's noise settling into a hum you can almost mistake for the sound of the earth breathing. The red of the palace walls has softened to a muted rose, the roof tiles darkening to ink blue in the dusk. Even the lanterns seem hesitant to flare just yet, as though they're waiting for the last threads of daylight to let go. You take a slow breath, letting the scent of warm stone and distant cooking fires drift over you. The day's sharp edges, formal bows, measured words, careful steps, begin to blur. Here in this moment, the Empire feels less like a vast machine and more like a single living creature, quiet and watchful in its rest. The wind brushes your sleeve and you think of the many sleeves you've worn in these streets. Plain cotton in the markets, grey silk in the palace corridors, dust-streaked hemp on the village paths, each one a costume in the long play of survival, and beneath them all your own heartbeat, steadying now as the light fades. Below, the city begins to glow, points of light catching in tea-house windows, flickering along the riverbanks. Somewhere a peeper string hums, somewhere else a kettle clicks against its lid. The Empire at night is not the same as by day. It is gentler, almost tender, as if giving you permission to stop watching your every step. You know that when morning comes, the drums will sound again and the whole intricate web will tighten. But for now, you can let go. The Dragon Throne will still be there tomorrow, the city will still breathe, and you, tonight, are allowed to simply drift.